The Central Bank of Nigeria has reiterated the resilience, safety and soundness of the nation's deposit money banks and other financial institutions under its supervision in spite of the global challenges caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, the bank is currently holding its Monetary Policy Committee meeting today and will climax tomorrow. Well, let's have this conversation with Femi Oladehin, partner at Argentil Capital Partners. Femi, thank you so much for taking the time out to join us today. Before we go to the MPC meeting, which starts today, and of course, the MPC members will have to take a decision on monetary decision tomorrow. But let's talk about this headline from some of the dailies today. Nigerian banks are resilient, safe, and the CBN has debunked some rumors, it says, circulating on social media, challenging the soundness of some Nigerian banks. What do you make of those stories? Obviously, they are unfounded. No proof was provided, as far as I know, but the CBN has come out to respond.
But look, I mean, I think that, you know, it's just almost like a vicious cycle that we generally enter to. When there's a crisis in the macro space, generally the stability of the banking industry comes into question. And naturally, we have to accept that there's been significant crisis in the macro space. You know, just look at the way inflation, input costs have risen dramatically, would generally mean that, you know, the credit portfolio of banks would need to be stress tested. And I know that this is something that the banking industry has been doing regularly. One of the things that has become almost standard for us on the market is that systemically important banks continue to get, you know, significant regulatory support and oversight from the central bank, and that in itself portends positively for the market and for the industry. But one thing that we all have to be conscious of is that the risks to the industry, and not just the banking space, but generally to the business space and the growth in credit that we've seen are more enhanced today, just due to the COVID pandemic, as well as the increasing security challenges that we're having in the country. I think that what should happen is, you know, during the last 2 or 3 times that we've had a crisis in the banking space, the central bank has usually done a stress test on the banks, and that's probably something that the industry will get some significant comfort
absolutely.
from.
If I could just come in here, Femi, sorry to interrupt you. You know, when I saw this story, what happened in First Bank earlier this year, I believe, came to my mind, because actually it did take the removal of the entire board by the CBN for the general public and indeed the media to learn of the extent of the insider abuse that was allegedly, you know, taking place there. Do you think that perhaps that has created some level of doubt on when it comes to the oversight supervision role of the CBN?
Look, I think that we have to cut the CBN some slack. We have to also remember that the central bank is perhaps one of the most sensitive institutions in the country. If any information comes out of the central bank that gives any form of indication that there is instability in the financial system, that could be potentially damaging for the industry. So I think that we need to understand that the constraints that the central bank faces are standard constraints that a central bank would face, especially in a turbulent economic environment as we have. So yes, the First Bank information only came into the public space when the central bank moved against the management team. But the reality is that that's the only way the central bank can intervene. If they were to intervene at every time when there is, you know, when a bank probably misses its liquidity thresholds or misses its capitalization threshold, we could see potential run on the industry.
Oh, okay.
That would be damaging in the long term.
All right, quickly now, Femi, we have about 4 minutes left. Your thoughts on the MPC meeting, the start today, tomorrow will be the decision. Obviously, the CBN members will talk about, you know, inflationary threat. We've seen that slight deceleration in headline inflation. However, food inflation is still accelerating on a month-on-month basis. What are you expecting in terms of the comments from the CBN governor?
I think that they would continue to remain hawkish, you know, but in terms of actual monetary policy moves, I don't expect that we're going to see any monetary policy moves. They're just going to keep saying what they've said in the last 6 months, which is they're monitoring the behavior of the market, and if there is a need for them to move, they would move. Okay,
but in terms of, I mean, because we know that CBN also has taken on, and it calls itself the People's Central Bank. We've seen all the initiatives, interventions, the backward integration, etc. should we expect the CBN to move even more aggressively into the year?
They have very limited capacity, Esther. That's the reality. The fiscal and monetary policy disconnects we have are significant. I don't think that there is significant capacity in the CBN balance sheet to continue the level of intervention that we saw last year. So yes, their options are very limited.
But are you expecting comments on the exchange rate also? We've seen that NAFEX rate, that signal to the market that we could be moving towards that gradual reunification of exchange rate system. Your thoughts?
I expect them to talk about the exchange rate, that the supply constraints are still there. And don't forget that diaspora remittances are down $5 billion on average over the last 24 months. So I expect them to talk about it, just to try and give the market some level of comfort that is an index that they have control over. But we all know that, you know, it's wishful thinking right now.
Well, this diaspora story is last story, down 20%, 5 billion, like you said. But then analysts are saying that perhaps we need to engage deep in our engagements with the diaspora community, you know, in terms of development, just make them, you know, what part of us, as it were.
Look, I mean, that's important. I still say that the occurrences of October last year probably left a lot more damage on the Nigerian diaspora than the average Nigerian in the country. And the impact of that is something that we'll continue to measure over the next few years. But I think that the level of engagement that we need to continue to do with the diaspora people is important. The government has made some moves. There is still significant scope for improvement. But if we want to continue to see that as a capex, as a flow of forex into the market, then that engagement has to even increase. Give them the right vote,
thank you so much, Femi, for talking to us today. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for your time. Femi Oladehin, partner at Argentil Capital Partners Limited.